The play is drastically different from WSL, and so that is a little bit of a lure for players to kind of test their mettle. Including Naomi Girma, but also Champions League play, FA Cup, Leagues Cup. They get a little bit more diversification in Europe than they do in NWSL, despite the emergence of some secondary and tertiary competitions that we're now seeing.
There is this huge conversation happening right now in women's football about all the different players, U.S. women's national team superstars that are leaving the NWSL to go be traded and transferred to clubs in the Barclays Women's Super League. And why now? Some of the flagship names include Brazilian international and former North Carolina forward Caroline. She was an NWSL MVP. She has now headed over and she is with Manchester City on a 3.5-year deal. U.S. women's national team gold medalist and former San Diego Wave defender Naomi Girma. She's with Chelsea and she'll be there until 2029. Feels like a lifetime from now. Plus, it dropped this morning. U.S. women's national team defender, formerly with Gotham, Jenna Neiswanger, is joining Arsenal, and she is now headed overseas to play in the Women's Super League. There's also a lot of rumors. Trinity Rodman, Sam Coffey, Crystal Dunn, are they all headed to the Super League? And Sandra, the biggest question of them all, is the NWSL in trouble?
Why, Lisa? Listen, I got to give you your props, girl, because you've been cooking this week. You've been hit with this question left and right. And it's funny. I want to preface this by saying that, like, it's funny to hear this kind of framing or to hear the reaction to it. It's giving MLS trauma for me. It's giving, this American concept of, like, not being chosen over the other and all that. And transfer culture is, like, still relatively new to the women's game, and it's growing. And I think it's very funny that this is where, like, the bucket is. The bucket is that it's all going into this one bucket. There's not multiple buckets, it's one, and then the bucket's on fire.
Sandra, should we be concerned? Is the NWSL in trouble? You're freaking me out. I'm getting hot sweats.
Oh my goodness, Lisa, I'm with you. I'm not concerned about the NWSL. And
okay, I'm gonna be honest. Tuesday, I got asked this question on Morning Footy, and I was all calma, tranquila. But that was before we had all of this succession of
everybody's
players.
Just running out there yelling, fire.
Listen, my head is not yet on fire, but I'm a little bit like, oh, damn, like WSL are making moves. Some really interesting, and some honestly in the best interest of getting a little bit more diverse experience. I was arguing till I turned blue in the face that, NWSL is safe. It's the top league in the world. The play is drastically different from WSL. And so that is a little bit of a lure for players to kind of test their mettle. Including Naomi Girma, but also Champions League play, FA Cup, Leagues Cup. They get a little bit more diversification in Europe than they do in NWSL, despite the emergence of some secondary and tertiary competitions that we're now seeing in the progression for NWSL. We have Summer Cup, Club World Cup, things like that are sort of emerging as potentials. And then down the pipeline, you look at WSL, and now next season, not yet, they're going to have their own Europa League for women. So their competition is expanding rapidly, and I can understand how that would be attractive. Plus the benefit of collecting a bag of cash. I know Lisa's mentioned a bunch of times just pointing to the new CBA and how it definitely helps and it's groundbreaking, but it also hinders some players. So that could also be a point of tension and tug with, the potential of going overseas. So I don't know. I'm not panicked yet, but I'm a little bit.
Sounds like you are.
I'm not. This is Italian.
Like,
this is just how I am.
Would you consider yourself someone who's easily influenced? Are you hitting those shopping links when they come up on your algorithm? Listen,
Are you watching me? Are you my spy at my phone?
I might be the spy. This is soccer, man, and we're talking about a transfer culture that is evolving. It hasn't really existed in the women's game. I think we're talking maybe 2020. The fact that we can come onto these shows and maybe kind of count off on one hand the kind of historic landmark type of transfer fees that have been made since 2020. That's not a long time. That's A, not a long time, and B, not many. So I think there's this concept of, like, wanting to lean into these narratives for me, which I think are soft and lazy, quite frankly. It's something that you see all the time in men's professional leagues where transfer culture is far more established and far more developed. And when you lean into that narrative in the women's side of the game, you're speaking about it in a way in which you're operating on the assumption that all leagues are created equal globally in the women's game. And that is also untrue. And that's also when you tell on yourself a little bit. The fact that we're talking about two very specific leagues, we're talking about one very specific team in Women's Super League, and paying not just this transfer for Naomi Girma, but we're not even getting into the fact that there's news that they made for Kira Walsh as well with FC Barcelona. So there's all these things that are kind of happening in this span of 1 week, and it's hard to ignore that, right? And it's hard not to maybe lean into those things. But we're also not operating in an ecosystem where women's leagues look and operate like they did a decade ago. They look very different now, and they're evolving in different ways. And this is one of those ways. But one of the ways that I would argue that it's not developing is where there's going to be one league to rule them all. And like this one league has the crown now versus this other league that thought that it did. If anything, I think it symbolizes the type of talent that exists in American women's soccer that finds itself developing within NWSL. And it should be shocking to no one that arguably the best center back in the world, who was coming off a tough club season with San Diego Wave, found it this time was the best time for her to make this move at her point in her career. That shouldn't be shocking to anyone. If anything, it should make sense. And I think if you're Chelsea, and there's already rumors out there that you're keeping an eye on Trinity Rodman or Sophia Smith Wilson, Karshui, Lily Johannes, like, of course they are. They're Chelsea. Why wouldn't you keep your eye on 5 other players? You got to keep your eye on a dozen so you can land at least one of them. This is like these type of normal occurrences that I think people maybe didn't anticipate at one point in the game of women's soccer. But it's happening now, and this is just like the tipping point for those scales to maybe kind of level out or go one way or the other, to where now this type of attention does happen. This type of kind of frenzied reaction does happen during windows like this. So it didn't look this way before 2020, didn't feel that way before 2020. 2020 changed some things for a lot of people, and now here we are in 2025, and I wouldn't be surprised if in 2030 we're talking about a player catching a 2.1 million transfer fee. That's how this works, and that's how it's supposed to
go.
Honestly, before that too, right? I could see that happening before. You also, guys, think of it from the player's perspective. If you are a player and you just want to go freaking win a couple trophies, I'm going to Chelsea. That is like, there's an element of the epitome of just winning, right? They are gunning for their 6th straight WSL trophy this year. They're looking to compete in Champions League, and there's a change of pace. There's a change of scenery. Plus, you're probably going to get paid a little bit more going overseas to England. Sandra, you're alluding a lot to 2020 and what happened. That was when there was a huge wave of players from U.S. women's national team going from the NWSL overseas. You look at Sam Mewis, Rose Lavelle, Tobin Heath, Kristen Press. These are all superstar names that went over there. They also came back, but things look a little different now because we're seeing players like Naomi Girma sign a 4.5-year deal. That is through the next World Cup. That is into 2029. And that is a really, really long term. That's a really long contract. There has to be the element, and people in our chat are asking this, on socials we're seeing it. How much influence does Emma Hayes, the new U.S. women's national team head coach, have in this? She came from Chelsea. She came from the Super League, and she said, I think I want players to go there. They should get experience. They should go out there. So how much influence does Hayes have on this? I'm going to call it an exodus of U.S. players going overseas. I'm adding fuel to the fire.
Ooh, I got two easily influenced people on this show now.
I
It's like,
know. I'm ready to go. I got it locked and loaded. This answer. Go ahead, Sandra.
well, first of all, she's right. Like Emma Hayes is correct. Like I'm gonna always want to see this type of stuff happen for women's soccer. I'm gonna want to see there be player movement. I'm gonna want to see players experience things in different leagues and how that benefits them not only in their professional careers, but how we see that stuff come to life in international play. But yeah, I think that's part of what comes with this. I mean, you go and you go and get your leading candidate in Emma Hayes to run this program for US soccer, and naturally there's going to be influence there. I mean, and that's an open secret at this point. I mean, when you've got players and coach who are saying that they have good relationship, that there's a lot of trust there, that there's almost an open door policy. If players have questions about potentially playing overseas, are it's foolish to operate under the assumption that they are not going to ask those questions of one of their head coach for the national team. So I think if people are worried about that, I think you have to recognize the fact that that was maybe always going to be one of these caveats of having a coach like Emma Hayes in the role. And I also think it's kind of like foolish a little bit too. Again, it's just I'm very pro player movement, so I'm here for it.
I think that the impact that Emma's having isn't necessarily on her sort of directive, which I think people are alluding to, especially fans being like, oh, Emma's telling these players to go abroad. I think the impact that we're actually seeing is on other coaches abroad that are now turning their head towards American players because Emma is someone who is one of the best, if not the best women's manager globally, with this record of success that they respect. And so her eye is respected. And so her working with the national team has now illuminated and shined a brighter light on a lot of American players that you wouldn't have normally seen. So I think that there's been a shift more in scouting from England. And so I think that that's been an aid. I don't think that it's like Emma nudging them like, go to England, it's better play, because we do know that Emma's in the same camp as a lot of other England coaches where they're saying, you know, NWSL is like Champions League every single week.
Right.
The level of play is leaps and bounds higher. And so, yes, for the diversity and experience, you can go play in WSL, play Champions League, play in inevitable formation of Europa League. However, it's going to be a different sort of tactical skill you pick up, not it's apples to oranges to what NWSL offers.
Hands down. There's pros and cons to each league across the board. The parity in the NWSL is insane. As you just said, Christine, it is Champions League every single week. You don't know what's going to happen. However, you go to WSL, then you are competing in Champions League and you are going up against opposition that you're going to most likely see in the World Cup, right? Because there's a lot more of that happening. That was one of the things Caroline talked about before she went and signed with City. She said, I want to be going up against center backs that I'm going to see in the World Cup come 2027 in Brazil. That's who she wants to go against. There's nothing wrong with that either. There's nothing wrong with it. This is growth. This is good for the sport.
The thing that I do find interesting, and I totally agree with you, Lisa, is that when we talk about players wanting to go do Champions League, I think the importance there lies in the capacity to tackle packed fixture schedules in that respect, because those demands outside of international duty aren't on the shoulders of NWSL players. So that's great. With that being said, NWSL is the most competitive league globally. When you look at the parity in other leagues, so Serie A Femminile, WSL, D1 Arkema, Liga F, Liga MX, they all have this cliff after that top of the table slot in fifth, that it's just not competitive. And so, yes, you're seeing the best of those leagues, but that's also, how do I say this? You know what? I'm not going to say it politically correct. That's all those leagues have to offer are those top five teams. And so you get the cream that's risen to the top. Beyond that, nobody's watching those games, which is part of the problem, in my opinion, when NWSL want to diversify their competition. And I love Liga MX. There's a lot of really good talent there and players that go unsung because people aren't watching that league like they should be. But it diminishes the value of them when you have like a summer cup where it ends up being NWSL players playing other NWSL teams. because Liga MX gets bounced out. So the ideas are there, but the foundation isn't yet. So there's a lot of underdeveloped leagues outside of NWSL that make it hard to compete. We just saw at WSL teams, principally Chelsea and Arsenal, come this summer for the first time ever with their women's team to do friendlies with NWSL. And yes, I do classify them as successful, but I think we need more of that kind of play that will yield more eyes on the game and more benefit.
Change, adversity, uncomfortable situations, being put in new and different situations. When has that ever made anyone worse? It is going to make these players better. And we're talking about U.S. women's national team players that are going overseas, whether it be Germa, Neiswanger, Rodman, Dunn, Coffey, whoever you want to throw out there. This is only going to help them come the next major international tournament, which is the World Cup in 2027 that the U.S. wants to win. This is only going to help. Now, this is like, we're getting big picture conversation here. Going a little bit back towards the NWSL, Sandra wrote an incredible article. Go read it on cbssports.com. She dives into every single aspect of this, so go read it. But there is another little corner of this conversation that we haven't touched on yet. And that is the fact that, guys, we can't forget all the foreign players that have come to the NWSL and made a huge difference, whether that's world record transfer signings at the time, MVP wins. Hello, we called the team that won the double this year, Orlando Pride, that won the Shield and the championship, we called them Baby Brazil. They had all those Brazilian internationals. So although we have U.S. players leaving, U.S. internationals leaving the NWSL, we cannot forget about Temwa Shawinga, Barbara Bander, Rachel Kudanagi, Asisato Shwala, and Katrin Berger. The list goes on and on and on. So when you think about, Sandra, the balance of incoming players leaving, which way does the scale tip? Is it balanced? Is it unbalanced? Does it even matter?
Well, it turns out it's just changing by the day. It doesn't matter. It sounds like today that maybe they're tipped the other way. I'm surprised that we haven't gotten into conversations the other way too much about how this affects Women's Super League. I mean, there are already folks over there who are expressing concern about that. You've got former Lioness captain Steph Houghton mentioning how this should be kind of a fee that puts Women's Super League on notice, and they have to make their own adjustments. But when you rattle off just a handful of those players, when we think about some of the most exciting goal scorers in the world, two of them are in NWSL. Temwa Chawinga just signed an extension through 2028. So I'm not concerned about this concept of superstar. I think it affects the fan more than it affects the league. I think people will be, feel a certain type of way that maybe their player moved somewhere else, that maybe they don't have access to viewing their games as maybe they did in the past, but that comes with the growing pains of the sport, tragically. And I would argue that those are just a few players, that you can rattle off. I think folks forget about the fact, that Esther Gonzalez was maybe part of this first wave of players kind of coming over as well, and what she's done with Gotham, Ji So Yoon with Seattle, Lacey Santos, who went on a tear for the Spirit. And it's not just players. I think we're opening the door. We're seeing this door open up to all of this for NWSL and in Europe. But there's also coaching as well. Like, we're not even talking about the fact that Jonathan Giraldes was lured over to NWSL to coach in this league, and some of the things that impressed him and his want to come over and spend time in this league. So it's a very wide spectrum here in terms of who and what is getting lured into whichever corner of the globe. But I'm more of the opinion that it's all in the positive for the women's game versus a doomsday scenario for one league or the other. It opens conversations up like this, the one that we're having right now, and it also opens sub conversations about things like salary caps and how those function and operate in different leagues.
The salary cap is a huge factor of this. Players are going to get paid. They're going to get paid if they go over there. You mentioned the fans, Sandra. That's so true. People in our chat are like, how do I watch this? I want to watch the Super League. I want to make it more accessible.
It's a fair concern. Yeah.
Heck, our producer Mark is like, man, I've been buying jerseys with players' names on the back, and there they go. Like, what do I do? I think that's more of the factors. Now everyone's just got to go get WSL kits Chelsea with the Germa on the back, Arsenal with a nice songer on the back. That's where it's at.
Foxy's already been there. Everybody should have already bought their Fox kit at Arsenal. Like, I am disappointed
Get
if you
it together.
Mark, we're
Get it
throwing you
together.
under the bus. Love it. I love it. Go get your kits that you like of these players. Support more teams. What goes around comes around. NWSL is fine. Don't worry about it.